1940s, or the early 1940s. Anyway, he wrote it in the 1940s. And he comes to the conclusion in that book that there's only one mind in the whole universe, and it's an optical illusion that makes us think we have separate minds. Mm-hmm. That sounds like Eastern mysticism, doesn't it? He comes to that conclusion by trying to understand what quantum physics really means.
Well, and Einstein said we have to escape from the three illusions of time, personality, and space.
Did he say that?
Yeah, he did. And in fact, there's a very interesting book by Ken Wilber called Quantum Questions, I think, where he goes through almost all of the great physicists, and they all had mystical leanings. But because Wilber is anti-mystical in a certain sense, he ends up trying to show that they were mystical despite, not because, the fact that they were physicists. Eventually, they were so overwhelmed with what they had discovered that they got thrown into mysticism from it.
What was that, space, time, and personality?
Space, time, and personality.
When I first met Timothy Leary, one of the first things I remember him saying was, the value of acid is at the peak, the space game comes to an end, the time game comes to an end, and even the Timothy Leary game comes to an end.
Which it has.
Well, yeah, but he was well prepared for it. He was used to dying.
Let me ask you a question about Tim Leary. I've often thought that perhaps one of your most important contributions was the clarity with which you expounded Tim Leary's Eighth Circuit model. I mean, obviously, you did a great job at that.
Thank you.
What was it like for you, kind of knowing Tim and working with that and putting that out?
Well, the biggest thrill I ever got, as far as that's concerned, is when Tim told me, you describe my ideas more clearly than I can myself.
Right.
I think that's the highest praise you can get from a genius, and I did consider Tim a genius.
Do you still feel his, in Prometheus Bound, you talk about the fact that it's the most complete map of reality in the universe that you had discovered up until that point, but that you expect it would be supplanted in 15 or 20 years. Is it still the best map you've seen?
Yeah, I assume it must have been supplanted, but I can't keep up with everything. I can't find, when you get to be my age, pardon me for sounding like Foxy Grandpa, when you get to be my age, you realize if you set out to be a generalist 40 years ago, every specialized area that you know something about, your knowledge is somewhere between 5 and 20 years behind the latest that's been published in that field. I'm not just talking about science. One of my passions is James Joyce, who's already entered this conversation a couple of times. I can't keep up with Joyce scholarship. How can I keep up with everything else I'm interested in? I wrote an article about Bell's theorem about a year ago. I went hunting on the web. I found new criticisms of Bell that I hadn't heard of before. If I hadn't looked on the web, I would have ignored them entirely.
But you don't regret having been a generalist. I mean, that's why you.
I don't regret it, but I feel more and more tentative about everything. I feel everything I know is either 5 to 20 years out of date. Well, except for a few things, like what I had for breakfast.
What did you have for breakfast?
Shredded wheat.
Was it good?
Yeah.
Good. Going back to magic for a bit, do you think that magic is real the way, let's say, there's that word real and the word is, both of which are not invited here, but nonetheless, do you think magic is real the same way that someone like Aleister Crowley thought it was real? I mean, can the mind actually produce, not only changes in conformity with its will, but effects at a distance in space and time?
Well, let's put it this way. When you manipulate the archetypes of the collective unconscious, synchronicities are often activated. Did I use the word activate twice in that sentence? Yeah, bad style. When you activate the archetypes of the collective unconscious, you often produce synchronicities or side effects. Does that answer your question?
Well, you're saying that you're not willing to put any kind of causal bounds on it, but there does seem to be more interaction between impacted parts that you're interested in.
Yeah, I have well, okay, let me try to get my head clear on this subject. I use Christian Science quite a bit. I'm probably the only agnostic Christian scientist in the world. I have observed that Christian scientists all die eventually. Even Mary Baker Eddy herself died. And yet Christian Science does work. It works more often than it fails. Well, they'd all be in jail. You know, every now and then a Christian Scientist gets arrested for using prayer instead of medicine.
Or for not letting their kid go to the hospital.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Well, if it failed as frequently as materialists, fundamentalist materialists would expect it to fail, they'd all be in jail. It works most of the time, but it doesn't work all the time. And you can't predict when it's going to work. To make it work, you've got to build up an enthusiastic simulation of faith if you can't actually produce faith. And that helps it to work. But of course, you shouldn't be a damn fool about it. Personally, I do not boycott doctors. I feel Christian Science is an aid and adjunct to any other type of therapy I may be using. Like right now, I am rather incapacitated, or partially incapacitated by post-polio syndrome. I am being treated by a physician who's using mostly nutritional methods to treat the condition, which seem to work better than orthodox allopathic medicine, but I'm supplementing that with a great deal of Christian Science, which he knows about and doesn't object to.
In Prometheus Rising, you talk about, again, basically getting your brain to work so that in the fifth circuit, your body can heal what it needs to heal. I mean, you imply there that something like real direct magic, going far beyond what normal science understands, is possible, and that the great potential of the human being lies in getting our neurology to work the way it might begin to work.
Yeah, well, I think that by and large, my agnostic form of Christian Science has worked well enough that in spite of some... Well, what have I got? I've got post-polio syndrome, which is a mechanical problem. Part of my muscles are dead, and the muscles that have been working to overtime for 64 years, ever since I had polio, to keep me walking around, they just got exhausted from overwork. But I've never been in a hospital in my adult life. I've never had any surgery. I don't have any of the major fatal diseases. I expect I'm going to die. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure of it. But I don't know when or what. But I'm doing damn well health-wise, and I think basic Christian Science principles are working. I could call it religious science because I'm a little closer to them, actually. They don't ban the use of medicine. They say you can supplement it with what they call prayer. I call it positive thinking or positive affirmations.
When I read Prometheus Rising, I still have my copy in my pack over there, I noticed that I wrote a few times, no mention of Seth. You know, Seth and Jane Roberts and the whole notion that you co-create reality and you create your own reality. That seems a bit even more far out and outlandish than most other things. And I was curious if you had read that stuff or had thought about it, or the whole channeled entity, you are co-creating your reality sort of thing.
Well, you do co-create your reality. You don't, to paraphrase Karl Marx, you don't co-create it out of nothing.
Uh-huh. So we're all somehow co-creating being here together.
Yeah, well, the way I look at it, you get hit by a car. I don't believe that anybody can prove what some New Agers claim, which is that you needed to be hit by the car, or you wanted to be hit by the car, or there's some karmic reason why you got hit by the car. But I do think in the hospital, presuming you weren't killed immediately, how fast you recover does depend a great deal on your attitude.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's dozens of medical studies that tend to confirm this. They're not well known, and the AMA hates to talk about them, but there are plenty of studies. And a very good book on this subject, which doesn't use any metaphysical language at all, puts it all in scientific language, is the Psychobiology of Mind-Body Healing by Ernest Lawrence Rossi, who's a very successful Ericksonian hypnotist. He explains in microscopic detail how the things going on in your frontal lobes affect the back parts of the brain, which through the nervous system affect every other part of the body, including the immunological system.
And all standard science wants to do is say there's a placebo effect that we don't understand. We'll just call it the placebo effect, and that explains it all.
Yeah, that really drives me up the wall. It's the placebo. What the hell does that mean? I want to know in concrete, how it works. And that's what I liked about Rossi.